The chamber was silent, except for the sound of Pam Bondi's voice trembling behind a rising wall of frustration. "Congresswoman Crockett, I have already explained," but Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, tone calm as ice. "Ma'am, you've explained everything except where the money went." The sentence hit like a thunderclap. The reporters' heads lifted. Aides froze mid-note. Cameras zoomed in as the question echoed through the hearing room. "Where did the $2 billion go, Miss Bondi?" Pam's jaw tightened. She shifted in her seat, clutching a folder full of papers she clearly hadn't planned to reference. I don't appreciate the insinuation," she stammered, her polished smile breaking. "Those funds were appropriately managed." Crockett didn't interrupt. She waited. The silence was louder than any rebuttal. When she finally spoke again, her tone was razor-sharp yet unhurried. "With all due respect, Ms. Bondi, records show $2 billion allocated under your oversight that never reached its intended recipients. So I'll ask again, where did it go?" A murmur rippled through the room. Bondi's confidence, once towering, now trembled. The woman once hailed as the GOP's fighter was visibly unraveling, live, on national television. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a reckoning. Crockett sat motionless, the embodiment of calm authority. Her every word landed with surgical precision, while Bondi's replies grew louder, messier, more desperate. And in that moment, everyone watching, from the press gallery to millions online, could feel it. Power had shifted. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about integrity. And one woman was done letting arrogance hide behind a title. As the tension crackled through the room, Crockett leaned forward one last time, voice low, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Miss Bondi, you can raise your voice all you want, but the numbers don't lie." The crowd erupted, gasps, whispers, the frantic clicks of reporters' keyboards. Pam Bondi looked up, eyes darting for help that wasn't coming. And Jasmine Crockett? She simply sat back, letting the silence finish what her words had already started. Hours earlier, the hearing had begun like any other. A procession of witnesses, a chorus of opening statements, and the predictable political theater that comes with high-profile investigations. Pam Bondi entered the room with the confidence of someone who had been here 100 times before. Her smile was polished, her words rehearsed. She spoke of transparency, of fiscal integrity, of protecting taxpayer dollars. But behind that performance, Crockett was listening, not just to Bondi's words, but to what wasn't being said. Bondi's testimony painted herself as the model of accountability. She boasted about her role in managing pandemic relief funds, her leadership in streamlining, oversight, and her commitment to fairness. Every sentence was crafted to impress the cameras. Crockett, seated quietly a few chairs down, flipped through her notes. Line by line, document by document, she had seen the discrepancies. She had studied the reports. And she knew that behind the polished sound bites were figures that didn't add up. $2 billion, taxpayer money, vanished under Bondi's oversight, scattered across shell programs and emergency grants that never reached the communities they were meant to serve. The committee room buzzed with routine chatter, but Crockett's mind was locked in. She wasn't here for sound bites. She was here for answers. Bondi didn't notice. She was too busy soaking in her own applause, too confident in her old playbook. Deflect, smile, pivot, repeat. But this wasn't Florida anymore, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't the kind of lawmaker who backed down. So when the time came, and Bondi leaned back after another round of self-congratulations, Crockett adjusted her mic, looked her straight in the eye, and prepared to change the entire tone of the hearing. Pam Bondi wasn't just any witness. She was once the face of law and order in Florida, a former attorney general who built her career on fiery press conferences and Picture-perfect media moments. She knew how to control a narrative, how to turn tough questions into applause lines. But in Washington, the old tricks were starting to fail. Her polished image was cracking. Bondi had been brought in to consult on the federal relief funds, billions, meant to rebuild small businesses and hospitals during the pandemic. But the more investigators dug, the more the trail of missing money pointed back to her. Network of advisory, committees and contracting, partners, names tied to private law firms, consultants, and donors that had one thing in common: connections to Bondi's political circle. And that's where Jasmine Crockett came in. Known for her sharp legal mind and zero tolerance for corruption, Crockett had earned a reputation for turning political hearings into masterclasses in accountability. She didn't grandstand. She dissected. She didn't yell. She exposed. Behind the scenes, Crockett's team had uncovered internal memos, inconsistencies that Bondi never expected anyone to find. And when those documents landed on Crockett's desk, she knew this hearing would be different. So as Bondi sat confidently at the witness table, reliving her past glories and flaunting her credentials, Crockett's eyes stayed locked on her. She knew the moment Bondi finished, the entire narrative would shift from self-praise to self-defense. Bondi had faced critics before, but not like this. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to spar, she was there to expose. And when she opened her folder marked $2 billion discrepancy, even Bondi felt the first ripple of unease. The camera lights brightened. The room quieted. Reporters leaned forward, pens hovering, as Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Ms. Bondi," Crockett began, her tone carrying both professionalism and precision, "you've testified that every dollar of the $2 billion relief fund was properly allocated, correct?" Bondi smiled. The practiced kind. The kind she'd used in a dozen press conferences. "That's correct, Congresswoman. Every expenditure was reviewed and approved in accordance with federal guidelines." Crockett nodded, flipping through her folder. The sound of papers echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. "Interesting," she said softly. "Because according to this internal audit, $600 million went to consulting. Fees, companies registered under Shell, corporations in Delaware, 2 of which list your former campaign staffers as executives. Can you explain that?" Bondi blinked. "Well, Congresswoman, those firms were vetted by the Treasury Department," Bondi stammered, her voice tightening. I had no involvement in vendor selection." Crockett leaned in slightly, her tone now surgical. "Respectfully, Ms. Bondi, that's not what this email suggests." She held up a printed copy. "This is your signature approving disbursement on March 12, 2021, the same day those firms received direct wire transfers." The crowd erupted in whispers. Flashbulbs popped. Bondi's jaw tightened. "I don't appreciate the insinuation," she snapped. "You're twisting the facts." Crockett raised a hand. "No one's twisting anything, Ms. Bondi. I'm simply asking for clarity. Where is the $2 billion that was supposed to reach frontline hospitals?" The silence that followed was deafening. Bondi looked around, her confidence eroding under the weight of every eye in the room. The sharp-tongued powerhouse who once intimidated networks now fumbled for words. And Crockett? She didn't flinch. Her calm presence was the loudest power in the room, and everyone watching knew it. Because this wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Pam Bondi's composure shattered like glass under pressure. The calm, controlled politician was gone, replaced by someone fighting to keep control of a sinking narrative. "Congresswoman Crockett," Bondi snapped, her voice rising, You're trying to score political points. This is nothing but a smear campaign." The room tensed. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras zoomed in. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, her tone measured, the quiet power of someone who knew she had the facts. "Ms. Bondi," she said evenly, "the documents speak for themselves. If transparency feels like an attack, maybe the issue isn't the question, but it's the answer." Bondi's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her throat tightened as Crockett placed the next page on the table. A wire. Confirmation slip marked confidential. "This transfer," Crockett continued, "was made to a firm that didn't exist 2 weeks prior. Its listed address leads to a vacant strip mall. So I'll ask again, where did that money go?" The air turned electric. Even the chairman leaned forward, sensing the gravity. Days later, the headlines blazed with a single truth: Crockett had been right all along. Investigative reports confirmed that the missing $2 billion Bondi tried to downplay had been rerouted through a maze of shell, nonprofits, and consulting firms, all tied to major campaign donors. It was the kind of scheme that usually stayed buried, and until Jasmine asked one simple question that cracked it wide open. The evidence was overwhelming. Congressional aides leaked receipts, emails, and transfers that pointed directly to Bondi's circle. Overnight, the story became a scandal, and Jasmine Crockett became the face of integrity in an era starving for it. When reporters caught up with her outside the Capitol, she didn't gloat. She didn't mock. She simply said, "This isn't about me proving a point. It's about the people who trusted us to protect their money and their faith in democracy." Her words hit harder than any viral clip. Commentators called it the calm before the political reckoning. Within hours, the Justice Department announced a formal inquiry. Bondi's allies grew silent, their statements suddenly cautious, their smiles tight. And while the nation watched, Jasmine Crockett stood taller than ever. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She was the one who spoke last and made it count. Her integrity became the new standard, her courage the new expectation. And as the world waited for Bondi's fate, one thing became undeniable. Crockett had flipped the script, and the courtroom that once felt like a trap now felt like her stage. Weeks after the confrontation, Crockett stood on the Capitol steps, the same place where countless political stories had ended in silence. But this one was different. This time, truth had a voice. Reporters pressed in, cameras flashing, questions flying. She smiled faintly before speaking, her tone calm, her presence commanding. "Power," she said, "isn't about how loud you speak. It's about whether you can still tell the truth. When the world wants you quiet." The words hung in the air like a sermon. Even her critics couldn't deny it. Jasmine had done what most politicians fear. She stood alone, challenged the system, and came out stronger. Clips of her speech went viral again, not for the drama this time, but for the clarity. Ordinary Americans shared it with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like," and "One woman versus corruption." In classrooms, young women quoted her. On TikTok, creators replayed her final line, "If accountability scares you, maybe you've got something to hide." Then she turned, walking back into the Capitol. No entourage, no theatrics, just purpose. The nation watched, inspired, reminded that truth-telling still had a place in politics. And as her words echoed across screens, one final message flashed on viewers' minds. Don't just watch and stand with the truth. Subscribe, share, and keep voices like Jasmine Crockett's alive. Because sometimes one calm question can change everything.